Friday comes, we wrap it up, and I get the phone call from TTN. The president and CEO at that time calls me, and guess what? I'm on my way to church. And he says, Dana, I'm interested. I heard good things about you. And I said, listen, Jeff, I'm on my way to church. I need to finish this up. If it's okay, can we take this conversation up on Monday? Hung up the phone and I said, are you crazy?
Welcome to the Refit podcast. Joining me today is Dana McFletcher-Hubbard. She's Chief Revenue Officer of TTN Fleet Solutions. Dana, really happy to have you join us. I know we had some travel and schedule issues on our first episode that we tried to get together, so I'm glad we're able to make this happen. Good to see you.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So we're going to cover a lot today, but why don't you give us the 60-second version, kind of who you are and what you're leading today?
Absolutely. So I work for a company called TTN Fleet Solutions. We are a nationwide emergency road service provider for the trucking industry. Primarily, we deal in class 5 to class 8 in handling towing, tires, mechanical, and so forth. I am the Chief Revenue Officer of the organization. I've been with them since 2018 and kind of ranked up from sales to back to sales.
Mm-hmm.
And so happy to be here today.
Well, it's great to have you. And you've got an impressive and extensive background that covers, a lot of different roles. So how did you find yourself in this seat? What was that career progression like?
So, starting way back when, I began with a company called CDI. They were a nationwide emergency road service provider in the 90s. Actually, when I was in college, I was going to Indiana University pursuing a management degree. And while I was working on my associates at that time, I came across this job on the board, and it was called Road Support Coordinator. I thought, what's that? So I looked at the skills and, being able to type, effective listener, all those things. That sounds like me. So, I reached out to the organization, and they told me about, being in the trucking industry and supporting drivers and what they did. And so I took a leap of faith, even though I never worked in transportation, and went in for the interview. And as they were showing me what they do, I kind of connect the dots now, Kyle, that, my history is that I was actually raised, around my grandparents who both were in church. My grandfather was a deacon, my grandmother was an evangelist, and at a very, very young age, I'm the first grandchild. And so I went everywhere with the grandparents, and I had a front seat to serving others. I think that seed was planted when I was young. And I had various service jobs along the way. I think my first job was McDonald's, and, I did telemarketing and all those things. And so as I'm finding my way, through college, and I come across this job of road support coordinator, and I find out that we're helping people that are broke down alongside the road. Crazy story. My family and I, we were on a road trip in a van, and it's like 8 of us, and boom, right? The vehicle breaks down on the side of the road. And I had a firsthand experience of being on the side of the road for 4 hours waiting for a tow truck to come and assist my family. And that stuck with me. So when I was having the interview and they were talking to me about what the responsibility would be in that job, it connected the dots for me. And I thought, this is something that I can do. So I started from the ground, taking calls from drivers, dispatching, worked my way through because I had telemarketing experience. At some point, they came to me and said, hey, we're looking to grow the business. Would you be interested in making some sales calls? So at that particular time, we had three phone lines. It was the CDI line. There was a leasing company, National Lease. They're still out there. And then
Mhm.
we had the Michelin phone line, Michelin Tire Corporation.
Mm.
At that particular time, Michelin only had tire road service that they were offering.
Okay.
So our company had went to them and said, "Would you mind if we started a campaign to be able to do direct marketing for them for mechanical road service because that's something else that we offer, and it would be a direct billing relationship." And Michelin gave us the thumbs up on that. So I was the first person to go out there to the Michelin national account customers and offer them mechanical emergency road service. And the rest is history, right? I
Yeah.
went through bringing on new customers and, working operationally and ranked up from there, from being able to do training of new employees and along with sales then came collections, which was probably the toughest 2 years of my life, um, to get an understanding of when you make
Yeah.
an agreement with someone, make sure you clarify all of the things in that arrangement.
Mm.
So as I worked my way through at CDI, I became the director of operations and sales.
Okay.
And unfortunately, with what we do, this is a multi-touch transactional job, and when I
Mhm.
came into it, it was very manual. There was no Google Maps. Matter of fact, CDI didn't even
Remember
have
the
email when
days.
I started this, right? And so, we were using the Rand McNally
Yeah.
C5 to find the driver and all of those things, and
Wow.
so as things progressed and the business grew, we were bulging at the seams and, you know,
Mhm.
you have all the ups and downs of growth at that particular time. So I had firsthand knowledge as I'm going through my career to get the associate's degree and my bachelor's degree. And at some point, I decided to turn back around and go back and get a master's in business at Indiana University.
Mhm.
And what was great about that is I was able to get working knowledge of the concepts that I was learning along the way,
Yeah.
and so I ended up sticking in the trucking industry because as CDI was growing, we had transitions in phone systems. So that gave me the opportunity to apply project management and to work with people in programming as we implemented new technology, like putting a website out there to help people with kind of a self service to be able to request things and get reports and all of those things. And so as times were changing,
Mhm.
my professional career grew along with it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
unfortunately, there came a time where CDI felt like it wasn't profitable to stay in the breakdown business. It
Mhm.
was a low margin business at that particular time,
Sure.
by the way we were doing it, and
Mhm.
so it took a lot out of individuals and it was kind of high turnover because it's stressful.
Yeah.
It's the breakdown business. You're here to help people with their problems,
Mm.
and everything's bad news, and it's your job
Mhm.
to be able to assist with finding solutions and so forth. And at that particular time, they just decided that they didn't want to stay in it. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
ended up transitioning me to TTN Fleet Solutions.
Gotcha. Well, you had a couple roles in there where you had to develop some thick skin pretty early on between sales and collections. I got to tell you, and then even that line of work, and I appreciate the perspective of the personal story because that ties back to a personal experience for you and what that felt like, and seeing that there's kind of a mission to this work. Um, but how, and you mentioned the influence of your grandparents, and I'm curious as you think back to your early days, like what still shows up in how you lead today? And I think you mentioned a little bit of that, but I'm just
Mm.
curious, like what stayed consistent with you from all the way back at the beginning of this that you've been pretty consistent with.
So, one of the wonderful things that I feel grateful for about being around my grandparents is that they actually taught me a lot about diversity without teaching me directly, right? Like in the church,
Mhm.
that we were involved in, there were all different types of individuals. And so I was exposed to, people that didn't look like me, and we all prayed together and all of those things. And so my grandparents, they were in church 5 to 7 days a week, right? If there was a
Mhm.
revival, or if, there was something that a drive or anything that the church was doing, they were actively involved in that. But most importantly, the people in the church, the members in the church, whenever they would have issues, my grandparents would be there to support them. Like, I remember directly, my grandfather had a house that him and his 7 children built together, right? And so this
Wow.
is a pretty big house. And
Yeah.
as my parents, my mom, and all of my aunts and uncles grew and out of the nest, and he took that house and he divided it up into like 3 apartments. And so one of the church members was a single mom that had some
Mm.
children, and it was a struggle for her. And
Sure.
my grandmother, she right with, little old me walking over there with her to show
Mhm.
this lady how to make things stretch, right? Like
Mhm.
making food from scratch and all of those things. And the time and attention that she would take with people, she did not have to do that. But, she always would walk me through, hey, you know what? That's what God has us here to do, is to help individuals in their time of need, even when you're going through, right? And
Mhm.
so I think that that carries through to what I
Okay.
do today, definitely, because when we're dealing with these drivers that are broke down alongside of the road, it's not just a transactional experience of
Yeah.
someone needs help, we have to find them and the money. It is about the circumstances that they are in outside of
Mhm.
that. Like, you have to be in tune with what's going on with that driver today, what
Yeah.
destination he's trying to get to. Is there something important that he may miss? Like, there was an instance this weekend that a driver's truck was broke down and he was going to make it home for Easter with his family,
Mm.
because a part didn't come in and all of those things, and you have to be able to show empathy.
Mhm.
And also, along the way in my career, reaching back and helping others so that they can grow,
Yeah.
right? It has definitely had a dramatic impact on the way that I lead others, because everyone is not at the same educational level as you. In particular, where I work now, the managers that I have, they went to the school of hard knocks, is what they
Mhm.
did, right? They
Mhm.
all worked their way up through the ranks like I did, in the business. And so being able to support people in their time of need, I think
Mhm.
that had a lot to do with the way that I was raised. And I continue to serve in the industry, even as I ranked up to the C-suite. You still have to be a humble individual that understands what's going on at all the levels.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes me who I am today.
Yes, it sounds like you came from a household full of love, and that's, and that perspective that your grandparents and your grandmother, showed you by demonstrating that people face different types of challenges at different times, and then relating that to even, professionally. I've got to imagine when you or your team is dealing with those issues and those challenges, like you've got people on, I mean, they're having a bad day, right? Like it's
Absolutely.
like, and the stress of not making it home by Easter, or you're on a family trip or something like that. So having that perspective definitely helps. Now, you manage, or you mentioned that the business was running kind of low margins, and at some point, and this is right up the alley of the podcast, but there's no playbook on this one, but at some point, you basically, as we talked about prior to this, get told on a Wednesday, I believe,
Hmm.
Dana, that, hey, the company's going to be shutting down and we're going to close the doors on Friday.
Yes.
Um, ta- talk talk me through, like, what what happened, what was going on, and man, how did you balance that? How did you handle that?
So, as I mentioned, through all of the hard work and the things,
Mhm.
the decision was made that they weren't going to handle emergency road service anymore because they had several companies. They're
Okay.
also in truck driver training.
Mm.
And so that is their core business. And yeah, I received the phone call
Hmm.
that at that particular time I was over operations and basically the business outside of the accounts payable, accounts receivable, that was at corporate. And they called me and said, we've made a decision that, we're no longer going to offer this program and we're going to close this division. And I said, okay, well, when is that going to be? And they said, Friday. And I said, what
Mm.
Friday? They said, this Friday. I
Oh
said,
my gosh.
okay. I
Yeah.
believe the date was April 11th, 2018, but don't quote me on that. Okay.
Oh,
So
wow, yeah.
then it was somewhere in there. So
Uh-huh.
Wednesday, they give me, the information saying that
Mm.
we're about to close our doors. Now, we have all of these customers that we've been doing business with, and now we have to turn around and explain to them because right after they hung up with me, they blasted an email from corporate to all of the customers to announce it.
Oh, boy.
So the phone's still ringing, drivers are still
Mhm.
breaking down, we're still managing the contact center, and yet I'm getting bombarded with phone calls. Dana, what's going on? Because nobody saw it coming, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I should have, because at
Mm.
that point I'm working 6 to 7 days,
Mhm.
like honestly, I joke about being on the Titanic and being the captain that was leaning on the fireplace, and going
Mhm.
down with the ship.
Mhm.
However, we were fighting. We were fighting to keep the business
Yeah.
and it just didn't work out. However,
Yeah.
on that Wednesday, I have to keep going back to the man above, if that's okay, because
Mhm.
honestly, when I got the news, it also was the pastor's anniversary at my church, and I had become a member of the choir, and so I had a
Oh,
commitment that night
okay.
to go and sing. So I said, you know what? I know that I have this job to do to close the business and to get things done, but I'm still
Mhm.
going to do this. And I went and I laid it on the altar and I said, Lord, this is
Mm.
in your hands.
Mhm.
Walked into the job on Thursday to do what I had to do. So mind you now, Kyle, I am still doing business with customers. They're calling the phone line because they have not found an alternate solution. I'm getting phone calls from people asking me what should they
Mm.
do because they've been relying on us for years. This is a business that has been existent since the 90s.
Mhm.
So trying to figure that out. I get a phone call from the largest customer that we were doing business with, and she said, Dana, there's this company called TTN that we have been doing a little bit of business with
Mhm.
with them, and they're interested. They're interested in you, and they're interested in the team. I said, Shelly, I can't even think straight right now.
Yeah.
Let me close one door before another one opens.
Mhm.
And again, I'm asking myself, are you crazy? Like you have opportunity to change your career. Like, there's this lead,
Mhm.
you gotta run. And I'm like, I have to take care of my people. So
Yeah.
given oh, by the way, I was the one that had to relay the news to the employees as well, right? So I'm holding
Yeah.
myself up as a leader. I am
Mhm.
guiding the customers that have trusted me for decades to serve them. What should we do? How are we going to handle this? And what are we doing? And also giving the news to the individuals that had
Mhm.
stayed with me and been loyal and telling them that they were without a job, without a severance, and it was over
Mm.
in a so Friday comes, we wrap it up, and I get the phone call from TTN. The president and CEO at that time calls me, and guess what? I'm on my way to church. And he says, Dana, I'm interested. I heard good things about you. And I said, listen, Jeff, I'm on my way to church. I need to finish this up. If it's okay, can we take this conversation up on Monday? He says, sure.
Mhm.
Hung up the
Mhm.
phone, and I said, are you crazy? You just had someone call you. And I'm like, nope, I'm put the Lord first. That's it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
we ended up having a great conversation, and he offered to fly me to Texas
Mhm.
and see what they were doing and the opportunity and find out whether or not it was a match, right? And as I went in and sat down, he said, "Listen, I'm not going to tell anybody who you are and what you're doing here.
Mhm.
It's up to you. Have your way. Anybody that you want to talk to, anything that you want to know about the business, go ahead and walk around and get to know the different department heads and all of those things." So that's exactly what I did. I
Mhm.
went in, and it's not like I had any consultant experience, but that's what I went in as. Now I'm finding out, right?
Yeah.
And I sat down and with everybody and I observed the way that they were handling their transactions and how their departments were operating. And I saw a lot of smiling faces and a lot of happy people and all of the things, but not necessarily for the right reasons, right? I come from the hustle and bustle of, hey, it's the business of urgency and let's hurry up, let's take care of the driver, go, 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 go.
Yeah.
And I seen people take a call and hang up and a little leisurely and all that kind of thing. And I thought, whoa,
Yeah.
we've got some work to do here. So the
Mhm.
good news about that is I immediately could see a purpose, right? I'm like,
Mhm.
here is a organization that does what I used to do, which is kind of a niche business, which was kind of crazy that
Mhm.
here I am again. And then
Mhm.
I look and I see an opportunity to really help the business. So what he asked me to do is kind of draft up a, assessment of the business and areas of opportunity. And I did that. And as I was about to go and lay it on his desk, he wasn't there for me to talk to him about it, but I went and nervously laid it flat down on his desk and walked away and thought, I will
Yeah.
never get a phone call from this guy. Because I made a decision to
Uh-huh.
stay within integrity,
Yeah.
and be the person that
Yeah.
I am. And
Mhm.
that is someone who speaks the truth about what I see,
Mhm.
and not necessarily just judgment of individuals,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
as I unpacked it a little more and I learned more about the business, I found out some of the reasons of what was going on with the process and how it was broken up, and that
Mhm.
people were waiting for a system to come back to them so that they can take their next action and the things that we needed to work on as an organization.
Mhm.
But the initial assessment, I didn't think that he was going to take that very kindly because I didn't
Mhm.
walk in and tell him what I wanted to, what he wanted to hear, basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I thought,
Yeah.
for a person that's looking for a job, I must be crazy, you know?
Well, I think that's an important piece because, as you and I were chatting, I think a lot of people will, I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but maybe play it safe, right? Kinda
Mhm.
sort of maybe, and just gloss over it. And there's that moment like setting that report down and walking away. Like, did I just tell this guy his baby's ugly, right?
That's
You know?
exactly right.
um, and frankly, a lot of CEOs or owners of companies, that sometimes that can be pretty challenging if they're not humble enough or they can't park the ego a little bit to realize. But something tells me he probably knew enough when he asked you that he expected to get some type of feedback. But what I mean, in terms of if you play that out, I'm just thinking about this.
Mhm.
But if you play that out where long term, maybe you softened that message, like what, and clearly you didn't, and I'm glad you didn't, and it's worked out for you. But like, what do you think that looks like in the long term if you do soften that message?
It looks like unemployment again, in my
Yeah,
opinion, right? Like
yeah,
you're going to get an opportunity on false pretense
hmm,
that a person's like, oh, okay, yeah, they see things my way, and
hmm,
I'm doing well, and then you get in and you're in the storm,
hmm,
and there's no life raft or someone coming to save you. So you're basically adding to the problem by
hmm,
not being honest, and as a
hmm,
leader. that's what you're being paid to do. You know,
Yeah.
you owe it to the people that work for you. That's most important too, right? Is that
Mhm.
your people are some of your greatest asset. And even though you think as a leader on paper, I'm doing well, if you are destroying the mental and, tearing down the individuals that are doing the job for you, there is going to be high turnover. You're going to have problems with your business. You
Mhm.
may be profitable, but it's going to be short lived, and so I feel like as a person that did not take the easy route,
Mhm.
I didn't make friends either,
Sure.
because people were in roles that,
Mhm.
in my opinion, they had cushy jobs because they were doing what Jeff said, right? And I think
Mhm.
he learned that as a CEO because he created the environment. I did not know that at the particular time that it was, hey, this is my way, this is the way I want to do it, and
Mhm.
I'm not knocking the man because if he would not have given
Sure.
me the opportunity, I wouldn't be here today. But as we learned one another, that was one of the things people didn't understand. It's like,
Mhm.
how does she have this much leverage coming into the company? Because he's like, whatever Dana needs, get it today, get it,
Mm.
you know.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that was because I was honest with him and I didn't
Mhm.
just tell him what he wanted to hear. And one of the things that he said to me, you know, before I took the job is he used to knock on doors. He was the one man band for sales for the organization and everything. And
Mm.
anytime he would come across a customer and ask them who they were using for service, and he heard CDI, he was never able to take that customer. And even with his technology, because remember, we're drowning
Mhm.
in manual intensive work, and he had found ways to automate some things. He's sending auto
Mhm.
texts and emails to the customer and some of those things. So to people, he enticed them with,
Mhm.
I'm a technology company and this is the way we do things. But
Mhm.
beneath all that technology, you still have to have people to take care of things that fall off the happy path, right? And
Mhm.
if you don't have the right people, you don't have the right processes to be able to take care of those things, it will have a drastic impact on your bottom line.
Mhm.
So really as a leader, I'm looking for long term. And that's one of the
Mhm.
things that I could say, even with CDI, that we had customers that had been with us for a long time. The lady that referred me, she's with an organization called Transadvantage, which is United Van Lines and Mayflower Transit. That was my first big sale when I was
Mm.
in college, and we started that account from the ground up, starting with their agencies and then their owner-operators and all of that, and built that program up to become, like, the largest company that we were doing business with, and so the relationship that was built there, it carried through to when I didn't even send my resume anywhere, Kyle, and
Mhm.
and that's why I consider it a blessing of the service that was done to the customers that were being supported by us, that in a difficult time when all the things were falling apart around me, here comes this person that was
Mhm.
grateful for the things that I did. And of course, they had
Mhm.
to make a decision to transition to TTN because they needed to find a solution quickly.
Yeah.
And a part of that solution was, hey, there's this business leader over here that would be an outstanding person to help lead the account, to help you in your business, because they had already had a little taste of what was going on with TTN to refer
Mhm.
me. And the rest is
Mhm.
history as to how I got to be with
Well,
Seattle.
I could certainly see why Jeff took a run at bringing you over. Sounds like he made a good call.
Thank you. Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
And also on the given the more direct feedback piece too. It's there's obviously a way to do that, and that this is I think where experience helps is you know is phrasing it and positioning it in a way where it's as you said it's not it's not personal, so to speak, and it doesn't come across that way, and it's intended to be helpful. But I think you had also obviously established the credibility. And I think that's the piece that sometimes people tend to miss is, have you put yourself in a position of credibility to earn kind of the ear or the audience to have that type of conversation. And that requires some honest self-assessment on where you're coming from and what you're doing. um, and that's where you get the disconnect on the messaging, is if the receiver of the message doesn't view it as coming from a place of credibility, then if it is accurate, sometimes that's where the message gets lost. But clearly you had established that. And as you moved through, you had a number of challenges kind of come up. I know it hasn't been the easy street. Obviously, we had during that tenure after you moved to TTN, you had both COVID
Mhm.
happen, which caused kind of an overnight shift. A lot of people went through that. Your industry, front and center on it, certainly. And then secondly, having to kind of rebuild after losing major customer. And if you can, maybe just touch on a couple things around that you had to deal with through to those challenges.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm gonna take it back a little further than that,
Okay.
even with CDI,
Yeah.
uh, it's been survival mode. 9/11 was the first hit in my career, that
Mm,
because we are a service, right? So
mhm,
the financial market, what happened to that? Cash dried up. People were having issues with that. And so the first thing you look to cut is what you consider not a necessity, right? So
mhm,
having to get over that obstacle where people pulling it back in house and doing it themselves during the 9/11, and then after that rebuilding, and then wham, here comes the mortgage crisis, right?
mhm,
That happened right after I finished my master's degree, and my career was going this way, so
mhm,
was my pockets. And then all of a sudden, here comes the subprime mortgage crisis and
mm,
financial market. And again, it has an impact on our business. It drops again. We have to adjust and rebuild from that. So I had some experience with, some bumps and bruises along the way when the
sure.
economy is not on your side, and being in a service industry and the impact that it has on that.
Mhm,
So things are rolling right along. We're growing in TTN. We're working together to, shore up some of the customer service issues that we had, and
mhm,
working internally on our training and all of that. And
mhm,
it was fortunate that for the first year, actually, that I worked for TTN, I worked remotely. So I was probably me, and I had two other individuals that were under me managing that account for United Van Lines, that we were somewhat the first remote employees for TTN. I think
yeah,
there was another billing person that worked in Ohio, but aside from that, everybody was in the contact center.
mhm.
So that was our first little pilot of remote work. So fast forward, 2019, they're like, hey, we want to promote you. We want you to move to Texas. I relocate. And here I come to the contact center with, 100 plus seats. And, we're in the building. I'm in Texas. And now we're just working together as a team to
Mhm,
build the organization and structure things. Well, along comes the pandemic.
mm,
What's interesting about that is, we were sitting there as managers because it was on the news that, there was this thing that was going on. None of us were certain about the impact and whether we should be concerned about it. And it was on a Friday. All of us
mhm,
managers were together and we were talking about it. And we were kind of laughing it off because I'm sitting there. I remember Googling, how many people die of the flu every year. And it's like,
mhm,
oh, only, this many people die. And I thought, oh, it's nothing. I think it was like
yeah,
160 people that Friday. And then by the time we came back, it was 1,600 on Monday. So we're like,
mhm,
whoa, wait a minute. This thing is,
mhm,
we got to get out of here. Right. So
mhm,
lucky for us, we have a cloud based system. So literally overnight, we're handing out computers and, getting people to where they can go and work from home. People are crying. They're like, oh my
mhm,
goodness, what am I going to do? I've never worked
mhm,
from home. And so we literally had to take a contact center that was in a building and go 100% remote. And we did that for the safety of the people that work for
Mm-hmm.
us. And so, luckily with us having, and there was a lot of people in the transportation industry that could not do that. They had to
Yeah.
risk their lives every day because of what they do, especially
Mm-hmm.
like maintenance professionals and stuff. You can't
Sure.
fix a truck virtually, right?
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
but we did have to, arrange all the equipment. And at first, we kind of did it blindly because, of course, we had the phone system that we use just like any other contact center to monitor whether someone's logged in on the phone, how many calls they make, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a difference with having individuals that are side by side and you are physically in their presence versus working from home. And of course, there was a concern about productivity. So,
Sure.
one of the things that had happened leading up to that is before we had to do it is I had took over the training and we had decided that, the market, even though DFW is a pretty large market, where
Mm-hmm.
we were located at, we were in Argyle, Texas. I call it a place of old money,
Yeah.
and so we're surrounded by $1 million homes. I'm thinking, who puts a contact center in the middle of all these rich people? But that's okay. He had a vision. I'm not
Sure.
judging him, and
Yeah.
it was a nice place. Don't get me wrong. However, the challenges of driving and traffic and so forth,
Yeah.
we were running into issues, finding people.
Yeah.
So we decided, hey, what if we were able to look further, And so
Mm-hmm.
we kind of started reaching out a little bit and playing with having people that could work remotely and train remotely. And so we had kind of stuck our toe into that anyway. And
Okay.
then it became a necessity.
Mm.
So we were able to basically turn the entire contact center into a virtual work from home contact center. And of course, at that particular time, I was still over quality assurance, not directly over operations, but, I was able to lend my opinion to people because they had respect me. I earned the
Mm.
respect of the individuals that worked there by that time. And
Mm-hmm.
so we kind of talked through some of the things. And one of the recommendations I made is like, you know what? Let's get in a Zoom environment.
Mm-hmm.
Let's recreate the office on Zoom, right? And everybody's like,
Okay.
how do you do that?
Yeah.
And so the rest is kind of history, because I
Yeah.
know there's a lot of companies out there that work remote and they don't
Mm-hmm.
have visibility to the employee other than what the system is showing them. And in working in the contact center business, I have learned there's all types of ways to manipulate phones and data and all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And as a business, you will be impacted by that if you are not certain. But the other thing is the human aspect of it, not so much the
Right.
big brother, just
Yeah.
you lose the transfer of information, right? When you have people
Mm-hmm.
that sit next to each other that are learning or have
Mm-hmm.
questions, and you only have so many leaders to be able to deal with that. Well,
Yeah.
if you have tenured people, they can turn to the person next to them and say, hey, I got this
Mm-hmm.
situation, can you help me? You lose that when
Mm-hmm.
you're in a work from home environment. So
Yeah.
as we continue to basically work on the craft of the virtual contact center, those are some of the things that we've begun to perfect, which is how can we create the environment where we can still have that transfer of knowledge and people can help one another. And also you can make eye contact with people and see what's going on with them, because there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot going on during that time, especially with
Yeah.
the mental of it, right?
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
And so, I'm proud to say that, we took a swing at trying to come back in the building, because we were still, all of us thought, this is going to be temporary. And,
Right. 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 Yeah.
we came back and all it took was one cough and we were out of there again. Right. And then we were ready. That's it. We're out of here. Everybody go back home, So,
Yeah, yeah.
we'll
Well,
be straight.
I remember, and I think you and I chatted about this, but it was, I mean, you were really almost real time having to react to, and there wasn't a well scripted here's what we're supposed to do. So,
No.
coming from a position of leadership, you're doing your best to balance, safety and keeping the lights on and all of that. Yeah, and you touched on this a little bit, but moving into the remote environment and the challenges, which I agree with you 100% on all of that, but it also requires intentional changes in leadership. Um, did you see any changes, or did you ask or expect some changes from a leadership perspective on how to manage and lead, going into this remote environment? Such as, hey, let's keep our cameras on and make sure you're touching base with people. What were some of the things that maybe you had to tweak or change from a leadership perspective?
Oh, that is absolutely, you are spot on with the cameras. Like,
Hmm.
you would not even believe the battle. It was
Hmm.
real, right?
Hmm.
Because individuals didn't want to keep that camera on,
Yeah.
and so we had to
Yeah.
go through and change policy, so that unless
Don't
you
wear
were
your
on
pajamas
Facebook.
on a
Yeah,
call,
yeah, yeah, just being presentable, and making sure that, we even had to tell people don't no smoking. Like, literally, we were in a training class and I'd see this smoke film in front of someone, and I'm like, "Are they smoking?" Like, and so you
Yeah.
wouldn't just flick out a cigarette in an office, like,
Right, right.
those times. Well, you could when I first came in, by the way.
Well,
Uh,
I remember those days. That's right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you used to be able to smoke in the office, but not anymore,
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
times had changed, but yet the virtual environment kinda opened us back up to people feeling comfortable like
That's
that,
right.
and
Yeah.
then you're like,
Yeah.
depending on what state you're in
Yeah.
and what's legal and what's not, hey,
Mhm.
no smoking, like,
Mhm.
and so, but yes, they had to adapt to a different style of leadership and dealing with the person
Mhm.
that is working from home and addressing the things that happen when you're in that environment, like children,
Yeah. Yeah.
people in the home,
Mhm.
making sure that you have a quiet workspace. Even though we created all of the rules to say, this is the best way to do it,
Sure.
we still had individuals where, you
Of
can't
course.
stop kids. They're going to
Yeah.
come busting into the Zoom and all that. So,
Yeah.
put in on the professional backgrounds. I mean, that was something that at the beginning we did not have, right? We just
Mhm.
allowed people to kind of do their thing, and then we had
Yeah.
to hand them the
Yeah.
professional background and say, "Make sure you use this and
Mhm.
conduct yourself in a certain way." We've had people get caught on hot mics,
Mm.
where they forgot to go on mute, and you're
Yeah.
hearing a conversation that you shouldn't have, and
Yeah. Yeah.
like, I had one of the people that, she's not with us anymore, but
Mhm.
she was ranting, right,
Mhm.
about an employee. And I think someone, it kind of went virtual. Somebody did that recently. It was crazy. They said some crazy stuff in a Zoom
Yeah.
meeting, and people are
Mhm.
like, "Hey, your mic's not on," and so we had our fair share of that,
Uh-huh.
where we're
Uh-huh.
like, but the way we combated that, though, is, again, I still had training at that particular time, and I thought that it
Yeah.
was important to have, someone from executive leadership to go and meet them and greet them, talk to them about the business goals, and
Mhm.
kind of lay the foundation on who we are from top down, aside from giving the rules and regulations, right?
Yeah.
So that they could kind of bridge the gap. Because I think it's important that when you have protocols, that you connect the dots on
Mhm.
what makes it so important, right?
Mhm.
You can give the HR version of these
Right.
are the do's or don'ts,
Right.
but
Right.
you have to paint the bigger picture, Kyle, on
100%.
why it's so important to be professional and to
Mhm.
make sure that you're not disruptive because, hey, these call recordings, the customer can hear what's going on with the
Mhm.
animals and barking in the background, the
Mhm.
the children and the conversations that you're having, and all of these things are being captured because we are a business of integrity and we are
Mhm.
transparent. If we have a customer resolution that has to happen, people don't like it when they're like, "Hey, can I get a copy of that recording? Can I hear it?" And you go, "We listened to it first," and we're like, "Oh Lord,
Mhm.
I'm not sure we wanna let this one out," and
Mhm.
so because it could
Mhm.
become a liability for you. You have
Sure.
to be careful.
Sure.
So,
Well, yeah, and on that note, just real quickly, Dana, it's two observations I'll say is, you have to have standards, but the standards aren't what you say; they're actually what you enforce or reinforce from a leadership perspective.
mm,
And you just walked through a couple scenarios there where you guys had to change and adapt your standards, but actually reinforce it.
mhm,
Um, but the other part of that is kind of the why or the mission behind the work that you do. And not everybody's going to agree. I know that's shocking. That goes with leadership, right? Decisions that you make. But if you explain the why and give people the purpose and the intent behind it, it helps.
mm,
They may not still agree with the rule or the decision, but if you give that perspective, I think that's critical. She touched on two very important points there that I just wanted to highlight. So thank you.
mhm. And listen, one other thing I'll toss in for free is
Hmm.
I changed things operationally because one of the
Mm,
things that we used to do is every day we would start with an announcement from our director of operations of who did what and how many things they did, right?
mm,
So and so had 100 phone calls and so da 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 da. So we had people's tunnel vision on numbers,
mm-hmm,
so then it became a numbers game. You know, how fast can I do this and how many touches can I have and how many, am I going to make the announcement every day? And quality left things to be desired.
mm,
So that's what I learned, from ranking up from director of customer service VP to quality assurance during that time
mm,
is that our operational focus was how many things did you
mm,
do, not versus the quality at which you operate. So
mm-hmm.
that was one of the first things I transitioned. You
Okay.
still have to look at the numbers to make sure that people are performing,
Mm-hmm.
but pushing numbers at people can drive the wrong action from the
Sure can.
employee and direct their path as far as where the attention is. And if you put quality first, the quantity will come.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have employees that are very productive, but they do a job that is solid as a rock, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
as a business right now, our customer concern ratio is less than 2% of our
Okay.
volume. I think it's at like 1.5. And so
And
transition,
that's one of your key quality metrics is a customer.
exactly.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, looking at
Gotcha.
how many events did we have,
Mm-hmm.
and at the end of the road, once the job is done, how many times do people raise their hand and complain about
Okay.
there's something wrong with this cost, there's something wrong with how you handled this.
Yeah.
Less than 2% results in a concern, which I'm
Okay.
very proud of as a team
Sure.
because that's not where it was when I walked in the door.
Mhm,
And no knock
mhm.
against the individuals because the people
Sure.
that work for me,
Yeah.
um, are people that have been with us during.
Mhm,
But even as we sit down and as leaders and we look and we're like, we are leaps and bounds from who we were in 2018, and
mhm,
so it led to a decision because we had a tough go at it in 2025. We lost one of our largest customers. So
mhm,
that led to a reduction in force, because we went in different directions strategically, and that's
mhm.
understandable. It was a good ride while we had them, but they
Yeah.
decided to go in another direction. And so we had to do a reduction in force.
Mhm,
And I did something that was not traditional, and that
mhm,
was to keep the leaders in place
mhm,
because I was given, a directive. Hey, this is the amount that needs to be cut. And
mhm,
when I looked at our business and the core of what we have, I made a decision to keep the leadership in place because we talked about this. And I said, there are cuts that need to be made, but that
mhm.
means if I do it at a lower level, that you may have to become more transactional in those times where the business is because we get impacted by weather conditions, as you can imagine, in
Sure.
emergency service. When there's a storm, you wish you had three times the bodies that you had
Mhm,
winter snaps or high heat index and all of those things. I've lived it, I've worked it, and I've managed it. And so
mhm,
what I decided is that we will have to rebuild this business
mhm,
in all of our core areas that we need, whether it is the billing and audit or the call management team that does the follow up, or it is
Mhm.
the customer resolution or our vendor relations. All of these departments reported to me. Every individual that leads those departments started at the bottom and worked their way up. So
Mhm.
even as a person in the C suite, this is probably the first year that I haven't had to dispatch a breakdown. Okay.
Mhm.
But I'm telling you, you have to roll your sleeves up.
Mhm.
If I would give any advice to people that are ranked up, don't forget about the bottom layer. Like,
Mhm.
we get caught up in financials and strategy and all of that, and that's our job. Don't get me wrong.
Mhm. Mhm.
But
Mhm.
you have to get down, boots to the ground sometimes to truly understand what's happening with your business. So you can't
Mhm.
lose sight of what's happening with your people, with
Yeah.
your processes, and you have to take a look back at that at all times. If you stand a chance to be able to grow that business back, especially when you take a hit, because it happens.
Mhm.
And then you have the things you cannot control. Look what's going on right now.
Yeah.
The
That's right.
economy, the market is up, it's down,
Yeah.
we're good today, we're not. Fuel prices are skyrocketing. Again, this is being passed to the consumer. So the
Mhm.
people that we do business with, they are forced to make decisions about where they're going to spend their money. And being
Yeah.
in the service industry, you have to be sound because we were fortunate that during the pandemic, our business actually grew during that time because we were supporting the essential, right? I
Mhm.
think everybody had a newfound respect for transportation during that time, Kyle,
Sure
because when the
thing.
shelves started getting empty,
Mhm.
it was the first time in my life I ever went to Walmart and there wasn't meat. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't believe my eyes.
Yeah.
And it had everything to do, and I know, at that particular time, they were a customer of ours too through the Michelin program that
Mhm.
these guys were running day in, day out. And so shout out to the truck drivers and the
Mhm.
people that continue to help us with our supply chain and make sure that the shelves stay stocked.
Yeah.
But we're
Yeah.
the business that helps the driver when the wheels stop turning.
Mhm.
And so it takes empathy. That is a key factor, not just in the driver, but the full circumstance. There's so many people that are involved, and I think we lose sight of that as leaders sometimes when we get up on high and we're looking at the numbers and we're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it'll be easy. Let's just cut here and let's do this and let's do that."
Yeah.
I had to think about, what is the best way for us to be able to maintain the quality at which we're doing business
Mhm.
and also be able to rebuild as we bring in new customers. You're going to need that leadership because one of the things you cut out when you cut out leadership is
Mhm.
experience.
That's right.
And so, we held on to that. And I am right now, as the chief revenue officer, I've been boots to the ground. I think you've seen a
Mhm.
few posts from me
Yep.
where, I'm out at conferences and
Mhm.
finding out how we can align ourselves strategically with businesses that make sense so that we can partner instead of starting from the ground up. Like
Yeah.
we had a lot of concepts about other streams of revenue, right? We could get
Mhm.
into this and we can get into that. Well, I'm glad that I took the time to go out to these conferences and check out what was going on in these booths because
Sure.
there is a saturated market of apps and software,
Mm.
and I guess that's where the money's being spent right now because
Mhm.
there's a lot of these pop-ups, and people are
Mhm.
like, "Oh, let me help you manage your assets and let me help you with this." And they have a lot of the pieces, Kyle,
Mhm.
but we're that one thing that
Mhm.
can be bolted on to a lot of different things. So, the sales approach that we were taking was trying to do it a fleet at a time. And what I'm finding is quite possibly what might be a better solution for that is strategic alliances with people that
Mm.
already have consumers that have a need for this and
Mhm.
bolt ourselves on to that.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's interesting. And one of the things I'm reflecting on with what you just shared too, Dana, is and even reflecting on my own experience going all the way back into the military as well. But those tough times and those challenges are going to come, and it's it's the investment that you make in first of all leadership, to your point, and that leadership has to, you have to have good leadership, and there's no bad teams, only bad leaders, as the saying goes. But you have to invest in that relationship with your leadership, but then also with the team and the organization. Everybody can do it when times are good. It's when the challenges come, and have you put the work in to build the integrity and the trust and the relationships in a way to push through those difficult times, and that's something that you've touched on consistently through that. There's a balance of focus on results, of course, and that's what we're paid to deliver, but the focus has been clearly on people, and it's been a fantastic perspective that you've shared. One last thing I want to ask you as we kind of bring this thing home. If you go back to, and I've got to compliment you, Dana, because you did mention that you've did your undergraduate and graduate degrees at Indiana, and you haven't brought up the fact that they are the defending national champions in football. So,
Yeah.
so I got to
And the
compliment you on
Heisman
that,
Trophy winner,
and the
Mendoza.
Heisman Trophy
Okay.
winner, and
Okay.
probably
Yeah.
the number one draft pick for the NFL. Right. So,
Yes.
what a great story, and what a great year. But so speaking of great team stories, but anyway, I digress.
Mhm.
If you go back and you think about that version of Dana that saw that job posting on the board, and all of the time that's elapsed since then, what would you tell that younger version of Dana today, knowing what you know today?
I would tell her to never dim your light.
Hmm.
There is a time when, playing it safe was a thing, that
Hmm.
I was like, well, they might not like it if I say this, or they might
Hmm.
not want to hear, like the Jeff story, right? That
Hmm.
I had matured by then. And basically, after losing a 25-year job, I made a
Yeah.
decision that people will accept me as I am, right?
Hmm.
And if I do anything else, I am going to remain true to who I am, because being the person that is not, I've never been a yes man, let's not make that mistake, but there
Hmm.
has been times where I went along to get along
Sure.
and it didn't work in our favor as a business. And so, also to never stop learning, right?
Hmm.
Things change quickly, especially with
Hmm.
technology. Like I have a master's in management of information technology, fancy word for another management degree. But I
Hmm.
will tell you that I feel like, I should have did computer science undergrad. And then
Hmm.
also too, the things that I learned back then, the ones and zeros, that still holds true. But
Hmm.
look at us now. We're headed to an AI future. And
Sure.
what does that mean for the organization? Um, don't be afraid to take chances, but do your due diligence and your homework and make sure that you're not wasting your money and wasting your time. And that's with a job, that's with a product, that's with anything that you are dealing with. Do your homework
Mm.
and make sure that you don't chat GPT your way through this life. No,
There you
I'm
go.
just saying.
There you go. That is stellar advice, and obviously you've lived it, and I want to thank you for spending time with us today, and sharing a little bit of your background and perspective from a leadership point of view. It's been really good to hear. What's the best way for folks, and I'll include this in our show notes, obviously, but what's the best way for folks to find you and get in touch with you?
Oh, well, first of all, if they want to know more about TTN Fleet Solutions, we have a website. It is ttnfleetsolutions.com.
Hmm.
Service providers, we're always looking for people that can serve the customer. There is a entry form on there for you to introduce yourself and invite the process of being able to do that. Anyone that is in the field that needs emergency road service, or if you just want to talk about, breakdowns, I'm here for that. I love being able to network with individuals. You can reach me at dmcfletcher at ttnfs.com
Okay.
is my email address. And of course, I'm available via cell, but I'm going to tell you right now that because spamming is an
Oh,
ultimate
yeah.
high,
Yeah.
I don't really answer to many of the unknowns.
Yeah.
So it's probably best to shoot me an email.
Sure.
And my whole life is built around this inbox. So know that if you communicate with me, I'll get back with you and I'll be
Yeah.
happy to take a conversation.
Fantastic, Dana. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Kyle.
You're
Appreciate it.
more you're more than welcome. Thank you.